This is the Digital Shelf Insider podcast of MetricsCart. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Digital Shelf Insider podcast of MetricsCart. I'm your host, Shreshta, and today we have Lauren Livak Gilbert here with us. She's the Executive Director at Digital Shelf Institute. A lot of you would know her through the Unpacking the Digital Shelf podcast. What I love the most about Lauren is, and I must mention this here, is her great sense of community in the digital space for brands, retailers, and everyone here. And it's very inspiring because whether you're new here or been in the industry for quite a bit long, there's something for each of us to learn. And that's a great thing. So a very warm welcome to you, Lauren. And I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate that. And that is what the Digital Shelf Institute is built off of, community. So I'm glad that you feel that. And I'm excited to have you as a part of the community as well.
Yes, so much to learn. And could you tell us a little bit about your journey and how has it been, like all the cool stuff that you've been up to?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So I would say I didn't start in e-commerce. I was kind of a career switcher. So I, for many years, worked in college admissions, which is very unrelated to this. But then I started working at Johnson & Johnson, and I was very fortunate to be able to lead the digital shelf team. And this was prior to COVID. So there was a lot of knocking on doors and saying, hey, e-commerce is really important. We really need to think about it. Like the digital shelf is something we need to get all our data right and build out the strategy. And so I was responsible for the digital shelf there and owning the content strategy, the tech stack, the process, kind of collaborating internally. And that's where I really fell in love with e-commerce and also learned it from the ground up once Amazon changed their requirements on me multiple times. And I really kind of figured out the world of e-com. And then from there, I was a commerce strategist at Salsify. So I worked with over 100 different brands, really kind of helping them to build out their strategies. So how did they think about building their team? How did they think about their content strategy? What are the things that they needed to do in the next 1, 2, 3 years to be successful? And then I was fortunate enough to move into the Digital Shelf Institute role, and that's the role I'm in now. And the whole point of the DSI is the abbreviation for it is to build community, to connect brands who are doing the job today, thought leaders, partners, retailers, to have a conversation. And I think we sometimes forget that e-commerce has only really been around for 31 years. It seems like much longer because of the pace of technology and everything that has changed, but it's still new. And so we all need each other to be successful. Brands need retailers, retailers need brands. We all are trying to figure it out. And so the DSI is really focused on that community element and creating content and providing opportunities to connect and to network so that we can all really figure this out together.
Awesome. So awesome. I'm picking something from a recent webinar of Digital Shelf Institute, hosted by you, and there was a great panel of guests. And it was a live poll that revealed that about 60% of brand manufacturers struggle in achieving a single source of truth to do with all the data integration. So we know the level of challenges that is there, but what is the kind of progress that, brands have made in kind of the data integration work over the years?
Well, first, thanks for tuning into our webinar. I appreciate that. And then I would say there's some progress that's being made, but I'll set the stage with it's constantly changing. So if you think about the amount of data that was required maybe in the beginning, really early days of Amazon and e-commerce, it was still a lot and it was a big change. But over the years, Amazon changes their requirements hundreds of times per year. I mean, if you just think about the past 2 weeks and think about all the changes that happened with Amazon.
It's so overwhelming.
It is. And that means more data requests, more questions, more things that you need. And so what I think brands really need to focus on, and what I've seen the more mature brands focus on, is the right infrastructure internally to be able to support that, because you can't control the changes. I know a lot of brands would love to go to all the retailers and be like, let's standardize. I don't necessarily see that happening. So how do you internally build the right processes and the right teams to be able to support that. And I have seen some of the more mature brands build out centers of excellence around insights and analytics. And they're building out clean rooms, and they're working with all of their cross-functional partners to say, okay, what are the data sources that we have? What are the data sources that we need? And what are these data sources helping us figure out? So there's no shortage of data across brands, retailers. There's so much data.
Yes.
But the problem is it's hard to translate what question that data is answering. So I was actually speaking with someone who leads a digital analytics center of excellence. And what she said is, when someone comes to her and says, hey, I need this number, or hey, I need this data, she actually takes a step back and she says, okay, what is the question you are trying to answer? Because what ends up happening is it's definitely not the number that they had asked for. It's probably a different data set. So I think to make sure that you can anticipate a lot of these changes, it's creating that center of excellence model, making sure that you have a place where you can view all your data, you know where it is, you know where it lives, you have the right systems, but then kind of changing your mindset to say, well, what do I actually need to know? Instead of starting with it from like, I need this data set from this specific system, because it helps you then piece things together in a different way that you might not have been able to do before.
Right. So it's more of the intent that matters, and it gets translated across teams.
Yes, 100%. And I think the first step in any of that process is also just figuring out where your data lives. Like when anybody comes to me and says, hey, we really want to be digital first, or we really want to invest in digital, you have to have your data right. And that is a technology piece, that is a process piece, that is a where it sits in the organization piece. So really identifying your data and making sure that it's clean and it has a governance process. And then from there, having that team that owns it and then figuring out the process.
Right. So this might be like an overlap from the previous question, but how do we align internal teams? And this is again a very big challenge for brands out there. And I remember you mentioning a couple of times about this, that the sales team and marketing team, everybody works so separately, and they just don't have any kind of collaborative effort. So how do we get there, and what are the kind of challenges out there?
I love this question. It's one of my favorite because I think there's two kind of sides of the coin here. I think the first one being you need to think about incentives. Right. And we previously didn't need to think about that because everybody sold in store, and that's the way that organizations were set up. And that makes a ton of sense. Yes. But now you're adding this separate, a lot of people call it a separate channel, but I think it needs to be integrated into shopping. I feel like that's another podcast. But if you think about it as a separate channel, you need to understand how the results of that channel impact every other function. So for right now, the sales team might have a metric that isn't connected to e-commerce. Yeah. And parts of the marketing team might have a metric that isn't connected to e-commerce. But then the e-commerce team has a metric for e-commerce, but they don't control every piece of it. And so it becomes really hard for them to be very good at their job if they can't get their cross-functional partners to also be accountable. And so I think it all starts with shared goals, shared incentives, whatever you call it, goals and objectives, that every organization has a different word for it. But basically making sure that everyone who touches digital has a stake in the game. So they feel like, if I do this, then I get my bonus at the end of the year. Then I meet my requirements for the year. And then we're all successful. I've heard a lot of people call it more of the business owner mindset, where instead of just thinking about like your piece of the puzzle, you're actually thinking about the broader business. And that is the way that I think we're moving towards as an industry. As you think about unified commerce, omnichannel, whatever word you would like to describe it as, it really means that the consumer is shopping in multiple different ways. It's not about the channel that they're on. And so internally, you need to be able to support that. So I think the shared goals, shared incentives piece is really, really impactful. And that's something that you can do today. You can get your HR teams involved, you can get your leaders involved, and you can talk about it. And then I think the other thing is context.
Yeah.
So if you are, let's say, on a supply chain team and you're owning only one small piece of the process and you really don't understand how the work that you do impacts the full end-to-end consumer journey, why would you really care about the end result? Like if you think about it from a human nature, right? So
Right.
providing context to every single person that touches that process. And I like to use the new product development process as an example, just because it's really easy to relate to. Think about how many people and how many functions are involved in that. The
Right.
person in the beginning needs to know how their actions impact the end. And if you provide that context, then they think, oh, well, if I did this, it's going to affect this, and let's have a broader conversation about it. So if you don't provide that context and that education and get everyone in the same room who touches the process, then naturally, why would you care about the end result? So that can help break down some of those silos and those walls.
Absolutely. Makes so much of sense. And there's so many great points to unpack here. Uh, so let's come to the other side, which is the consumer end. And brands often face a lot of challenge in understanding the changing consumer behavior. So, what do you foresee on that end? Like, how is the consumer behavior going to change in the coming years?
Don't you wish we could predict every single thing that would change for the consumer? I mean, there's been a lot of changes recently, and I think a lot of that has to do with AI and how we're thinking about the future of shopping. So I do think there's an element of that. I know you had Curie Masters on, and she is the queen of talking about AI and Rufus and how search is going to change,
Yeah.
and I fundamentally agree with that as well.
Yes.
And even if not everybody is shopping with an AI assistant in the next 5 years, the way that people are searching or the way that the infrastructure of their retailer sites exist will be more like an AI agent.
Right.
So if you think about now, Amazon Rufus is already integrated into the search bar of Amazon. So when you start typing, it comes up with questions that you can ask Rufus. It has more conversational answers. So regardless if you sit there and say, hey, I'm not going to use an AI agent or I don't believe people are, that's fine. But the way that people think about shopping and the way they search is going to change. And that's going to change consumer behavior. And for me, the biggest piece of that is more occasion-based or mission-based shopping. So instead of going to the store and saying, I need sunscreen for a vacation I'm going on, you would say, hey, I'm going to a tropical island and I want to make sure that I have the right things for my trip. Like, what do you suggest I buy? And that crosses categories. It might suggest a sun hat. I'm going on vacation next week, so this is on top of my mind.
Yes.
Sunscreen, flip-flops, right? It might recommend multiple different things. So that's not just going to one category, that's cutting across multiple categories and actually shopping for an occasion. So I think that's a big shift in consumer behavior. And then related to that, or maybe I guess you could say on the flip side, I think it's less of a shift and more of a blend.
Mhm.
I think we're going to see a lot more blending of in-store and digital online shopping
Right.
because the store isn't going away. It is just going to change. And I think it will become more of an experience versus going and like transactionally buying something. So maybe you want to see the kind of fabric of the clothing that you're going to buy and you go to the physical store and they don't have a ton of clothes. They just have different fabric samples and maybe some sample sizes and you can try them on. And then maybe you can take a yoga class at the store if it's like a kind of like a Lululemon or something like that. And then you order it and it gets shipped to your house. So I think we're going to see more of that blending because overall consumers still really want to go in store, especially Gen Alpha, the newer generation. Like they actually want to have experiences, they want to touch and feel things. And so I think we're going to see that evolution really come out.
Interesting. And this blending is also possibly a result of the internal teams collaborating at their end.
Yes. Oh my, such a
Surely.
great point. That is a great point.
Yeah.
If you don't have collaboration internally, you can't even pull off that blend, right? Because
Right.
you don't know the e-commerce team that might not be talking to the in-store team and they might not be talking to the shopper marketing team or
Yeah.
yes. So that is an excellent point. You have to make sure that you have your internal processes and systems and teams supported before you can even think about more of a blended experience.
Right. So another trend that's taking over is how brands are looking at consumers' sentiment very closely, and rating and reviews, user-generated content, forms a bigger slice of the pie. So, are brands really, really monitoring them, tracking them, keeping an eye on them? What are your thoughts on this?
100%. I mean, I think this should be, if it isn't already, a standard for most brands, especially from a ratings and reviews perspective, because it's the closest you can get to the consumer if you can actually talk to your consumer. And so I consider that a baseline strategy from a brand perspective because it can inform your new innovation. It can help you change your product content. Maybe you're describing something with the wrong word, and then in the reviews, you see people are referring to it in a different way. You should go and update your product content with that. So I think ratings and reviews definitely a standard from across the brands, but other things that people might not be thinking about that can do the same thing are maybe your customer care center. So if you ever look at a product, so if you have one and you turn it around and it's something you put on your skin or even something you ingest, there's usually a phone number or an email address or something in case God forbid something goes wrong or you have a question, you can call that number and that usually goes to customer support or customer care center. They get a ton of people calling,
Right.
asking questions, giving feedback. As a brand, are you tapped into that? You already, that exists today. Can you tap into that? Can you get insights from there? And then also communities like Reddit. I
Yes.
have a very kind of unique breed of a dog. I have a Rhodesian Ridgeback, and I
Mhm.
fell in love with Reddit because he's got like sensitive skin and all these kind of things that I just didn't know about. And I
Yeah.
found this community on Reddit, and they recommend products, and we have chats about our dogs and like what works and what doesn't. But that applies to consumer products too. Have you checked Reddit? How are people talking about your products? Are they recommending them? Do they not like them? Are they recommending competitors? So I think it's also about finding those communities. Those are just a couple of examples, but are there other places that you can go and find where people are talking about your brand and then pull that insight back into what you're doing?
Definitely. The other thing is about a successful product detail page, and we cannot stress
Yes.
that enough. So, and there the eyes moves before the revenue, and it's the attention that happens before the conversion. What do you think are the strategies or best practices brands must keep top of mind when it comes to, getting that attention?
Well, I have to call out Chris Perry from
Oh, yes.
excuse me, from First Mover
Right.
and the NCAPS Awards, because if this is a question you're asking yourself, you should definitely check out the NCAPS
Yeah.
Awards, and it gives awards in specific categories
Yeah.
to the top performing PDPs, and you can learn from who's doing it really well. So I had to give Chris a quick shout out on that. But I think one of the things, and it's a word I use, and I think a lot of people in the industry have started to use it, it's about story selling.
Mm.
So thinking about using your PDP to tell a story instead of just like, hey, I need this image, I need these words, I need this description. Like, think about your consumer coming to the page. Where do they click first? Where do they go next? What is that story that it's telling? I'm really grateful I have the opportunity to be a judge for the NCAPs, and I laugh every time, but in the past two judging rounds, I bought a product because I had no idea they had a really compelling story. I was like, wow, I actually need this. And so it related to me. He told me a story of why it mattered, and then I purchased the product. So I think it's just about first, you need the fundamentals that will never ever go away. Like, you have to have your data right, it has to be accurate, you have to meet the requirements, you have to understand the algorithm, you have to check all the boxes. Once you do all those things, then you can think about what is my brand messaging? What is the story that I'm telling? And how am I doing that through my PDP? And because Rufus scrapes outside of the PDP, how am I doing that across the internet? Which I know can seem overwhelming, but start small and then work your way up.
So true. So true. And this is something I picked from one of the other podcasts I heard you speak about. And at your work at Johnson and Johnson, you helped them fix a broken digital shelf. So, and today we have AI that provides us insights. Yet there's a lot of predictability to it. It cannot be 100% true. So, what are some of the practical approaches brands can rely on to, if they are dealing with a broken digital shelf? What does the brand manager do? Where do they start?
The basics. I mean, I think I just said it. The basics are never going to go out of style. Like they just aren't, because you have to have the right data. You have to have the right teams. I mean, I think if you have a broken digital shelf or you're trying to figure out how to optimize your digital shelf, it starts internally. Do you have the right systems in place? Do you have a project experience management system that can actually house all of your data so that you can be agile when these changes come? Do you know where your ERP data lives? Do you know who owns it? Like, I think it's actually starting there.
Yeah.
And then if you have all of that established internally, you have the right teams, you know what your process is, all of that, then you can really think about kind of the 3 stages of content. So Mike Black from Profitero and I did a research project around content effectiveness, and you can find it on the DSI website if you're interested. But we talked about the 3 stages of content. So it really starts with content compliance, then it goes to content completeness, and then it goes to content effectiveness. And each of those stages have different requirements. So the compliance stage, it's like, okay, is what I sent actually showing up? Which might seem like easy, but it's not that easy.
Exactly.
The completeness, do you understand the requirements of the retailer? Do you understand the algorithm? And do you have the ability to say, okay, I need this number of images, this number of characters to meet all of these things? Then content effectiveness is my content actually converting? Like, is it effective for my consumer? And when we wrote the report, Amazon Rufus and ChatGPT actually wasn't out. So I'd actually take this to another level where it's beyond content effectiveness. Are you understanding how you need to optimize?
Yeah.
So before AI came about, and let me clarify, Gen AI, because AI has been around for a while. Before Gen AI came out and it was more accessible to all of us, you really had to optimize for the algorithm and the consumer.
Right.
Now, with Gen AI and AI assistance, you have a third component. You need to optimize for the AI. And so I think for people who are just kind of looking at AI as it's not scalable yet, it's not here yet, well, when it is here, you need to be ready for it. And that starts with building it into your content strategy. So if you have a broken digital shelf, yes, you need to focus on the basics. You need to figure out internally. But as you're going through that process and you're building out your content strategy, you need to look at how you need to optimize your content for the consumer, for the algorithm, and for the AI. And you need to build that into how you're thinking about it, because those are 3 distinctly different things.
Right.
And it's an added layer of complexity that you just need to build into how you're thinking about the digital shelf.
Great points there, Lauren. Thank you so much for sharing. And we've come to the end of our podcast, and such a nice time having this conversation with you. And I'm sure our audience will love the same. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. We've come to the end of the episode. If you loved what you just listened to, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We'll be back next Monday with a really awesome guest. Stay tuned until then.